Hey guys, today's episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast is presented by the Sports Spectrum magazine. I'm telling you, it's probably the best thing that we do here at Sports Spectrum, a quarterly magazine, 4 issues each year, and it's super cheap, $18 for a 1-year subscription, $30 for a 2-year subscription. The Sports Spectrum magazine has been around since 1985 with Dr. J. Julius Irving on the cover. And so I want to recommend that you check out the Sports Spectrum magazine. It makes a great resource. It's perfect for the kiddos. So you can check it out at sportspectrum.com right now to subscribe and get our Sports Spectrum magazine. Sportspectrum.com. Subscribe today.
Welcome to the Sports Spectrum Podcast, the intersection of sports and faith. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Hey guys, welcome to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. My email address, jason@sportspectrum.com, and you can reach me there directly, jason@sportspectrum.com. And our website, all of our content can be found over at sportspectrum.com. Podcasts, articles, devotionals, stories, videos, testimonials. It can all be found there at sportspectrum.com, and it's all free. So definitely go check out the website, sportspectrum.com. And one of the beautiful things that, I just mentioned there, the word testimonial. I think one of the beautiful things about walking this Christian walk is the testimonies, the stories that people share of Jesus rocking their world and coming into their lives. And today with Dan Scott, who's our guest today on the show, this is one of those wow testimonials. This is one of those stories where just when you think it's a little too late to invite Jesus and have the Lord get a hold of your heart, Dan Scott comes in and shares his story and says it's never too late. This is a guy who's the play-by-play voice of the Furman University athletic programs, talking about basketball, talking about other sports. He's the host of the Dan Scott Show. In fact, that's how we met. He invited me to be on his show, and then he was telling a little bit about his story as he's interviewing me, and I thought, well, we got to reciprocate here and get Dan Scott on our show. He loves his family. He's married, a couple daughters, a couple grandchildren, and he loves the Cincinnati Reds and the Cincinnati Bengals. So we'll talk a little bit about his love for his sports teams, or his suffering in that love of his sports teams. But it's the testimony. It's always the testimony. When Jesus gets a hold of you, that is the story that makes this show so unique, bringing sports and Jesus together. Dan Scott's going to do that here on the show today. So let's take a listen to Dan Scott, 30-plus year broadcast veteran, right now on Sports Spectrum. Hey, Dan Scott, welcome to Sports Spectrum, sir. How you doing?
Jason, I am good. We'll find out how good, I suppose, as we have kind of flipped roles here.
Yeah, you even said, we were making jokes about, are you better as a guest or a host? And I was on your show, and now you're on my show, on this show. And so is it weird being interviewed? Because for me, I guess I've done more of it the last few years with writing a couple books, but I much prefer to be the host and I call people the Chris Paul, where I can facilitate and dish the rock and then let somebody else score the points and be the star. Are you feeling the same way?
Oh, obviously that's my comfort zone because I've been doing it in one form or another for about 36, 37 years. But there have been a handful of times in the last year or so that I've been on this end of it. So, we'll see. We'll let you and your listeners be the judge as to whether I was better as a host or a guest.
Well, let's start with something that'll get you, I think, happy and excited, but it didn't end greatly, and that is your love for the Cincinnati Bengals. It's been, enough time now removed, I think, where we can have a unbiased discussion about this past season and the Bengals in the Super Bowl. Just saying those two words, Bengals and Super Bowl, when we spoke, I don't even think we were thinking about that. And then they just went on this incredible run, and you got to experience your team play in the biggest game. What was that like?
It was obviously incredible. The fact that I got to share that moment, as it ended up being, heartbreaking as it was, but I got to share it with my youngest daughter, who we always joke was the son that I never had, because of her love for sports, and she's a Reds fan and a Bengals fan like I am. So we went to her house and watched it with her husband. Her name is Becky, and her husband's name is Zach, and our grandson. So we watched it over there. It was fantastic. And, I had tweeted something out in the days prior to that. It had been 33 years since the last time the Bengals were in the Super Bowl. So I started doing the numbers. 33 years ago, my wife and I were dating. We had been dating for a month and a half. We, marriage wasn't even in the cards anywhere.
Right.
I was 21. I hadn't yet turned 22 years old, I think. So you start looking at all those things, no kids, and that's how long it had been. And, 33 years later, I've been married for 31 years, almost 32, 2 kids, 3 grandkids. So a lot of water under the proverbial bridge. I think the coolest thing about it, though, was the fact that, and you know how these stories are, Jason, it came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
You have this hope of Joe Burrow's the real deal, and then he gets hurt, and how quickly can he come back? And the offensive line has so many issues, and yet they just continued to find a way, and the defense got better as the season went along. I want to say that they're really ahead of schedule. The history of being a Bengals fan tempers my enthusiasm just a little bit.
Yeah, I understand.
But this year has kind of reinvigorated that, and to have somebody to share it with, in a situation like I did with my daughter was really cool.
Yeah, I'm envisioning someday the New York Mets getting and winning the World Series again. They were in there in 2015, and that's the one team that my daughter and I have a real good connection with. She's a big New York Mets fan. I told her, I said, I'm sorry. I'm sure you've said that to your daughter as well, in all the down years. But, if the Bengals can get to the Super Bowl, why couldn't the Mets go and get to the World Series again? That's how I look at it, when these teams that have been suffering for so many years. But to have that moment with your daughter, it sounds like it's something special, because I remember even just going and watching a regular season game with her, last year, and we were high-fiving when, Pete Alonso would hit a home run, and it was just such a great opportunity to bond in a different and unique way. I only have one daughter. I don't have a son. I have nephews, but my daughter, as you said, like the son that you never had type of deal, but you find the common ground. And for her to come into my world of sports, there's a uniqueness there. Can you kind of, I guess, expand on that with you and your daughter?
Yeah, because I have two. The older one is not a sports fan, Samantha, but we share a love of music. And one of the highlights of our life together was going to see Paul McCartney at Great American Ballpark in 2011. So, we got to experience that together.
Can I interrupt you for a sec? I'm laughing because in June, my daughter and I are going to see Paul McCartney and fill a bucket list, something I've wanted to do my entire life, bucket list for me. And Sarah, my daughter, said, she's 18, right? Or will be 18. She's like, Dad, I'll go with you, because my wife doesn't really care about the Beatles or Paul McCartney. I said, all right.
You married her anyway.
She married me anyway. But anyway,
right.
But my daughter said, let's go. So when you said Paul McCartney, it just made me smile, because I'm doing that.
Yeah. And I've seen him 3 times over the years. And I think my daughter has seen him 2 or 3 times, but I'm just not paying $600 for 2 tickets this time.
No, I know
she's going. So, but that's great. That's what she and I have together. But my youngest daughter has always been a sports fan, and we started this tradition, Jason, when the new Red Stadium opened in 2003, Great American Ballpark, and she was 8 years old.
Yeah,
she and I would take a daddy-daughter trip to South Carolina and go up for a weekend every year, and that's what we did every year. And 2003 up to 2010, the Reds were not very good. Well, in 2010, when we go, and she is 15 at this time, we're in a late season series when we finally got to go, and I think they're playing the Cubs, and we're sitting there watching and the Reds are in the pennant race down the end trying to win the division. And I look up, and all of a sudden, not only is she watching what's going on the field, but she's also looking at the scoreboard and checking the scores. Checking the I guess it was the Cardinals that we're battling for. So she's looking, the Cardinals are losing, or the Cardinals, they're coming back, and that kind of thing. So that was kind of a really cool moment for me. That's kind of a snapshot that I always have of our relationship of she and I being in the stadium together for the first time when a game, quote unquote, mattered, and how she reacted to it. Kind of just getting chills thinking about it right now. Now, I've been a whole lot of those moments in Cincinnati sports fan history of late, but the ones you do get, you cherish.
Absolutely. Dan Scott is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. As I wrote in my notes, long-suffering fan of the Reds and Cincinnati Bengals, but not so much anymore with the Bengals. So that's a good thing. Was sports always the thing for you, Dan, like going back to when you were growing up as a kid?
I have somewhere a photo. I couldn't be more than 7 or 8 months old, and I was in a tiny baseball uniform. So it was kind of inbred into me. The family that I grew up in, huge baseball fans. I'm told that my grandfather would hold me on his knee listening to Cincinnati Reds baseball games on the radio in the late 60s, when I was just a year or two old.
Nice.
So sports has always been an outlet for me. I played it in high school, played baseball and basketball. And I knew early on that if I wasn't going to be able to play sports for a career, I wanted to be able to broadcast it, and God's blessed me with the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. When did that come into the picture? I know for me, it was in high school when I realized I wasn't going to be a professional athlete. And I said, well, let's go into broadcasting, and you can talk about sports every day if you want to. What was that for you?
Probably the same time frame. I still had aspirations in high school, and had I been in a place that put a little more emphasis on baseball, and had I had maybe a little more self-motivation, I probably could have played collegiately. We were a basketball school, and so baseball was almost an afterthought. Still good enough to be an all-state baseball player. So I had some aspirations, but the broadcasting thing just kind of gelled on its own from the time that I heard Marty Brenneman for the very first time when I was 8 years old. I knew there was something about it when I flicked on that radio and heard that voice coming out of that box. So I would sit in the kitchen in my parents' house. There was a small television there, and I would turn the sound down, and I would do the broadcast of the games, and I'm 14, 15, 16 years old. I think that's finally how I got a television in my room. They got tired of hearing me. But I think that's where the bug first hit. And I got a chance to start working at my hometown radio station when I was 18 years old. And I don't know what the experience was like for you, but I was in that radio station for about 2 weeks, and we had a staff meeting, and guy who did our middays, who was a radio lifer, and I'll still remember his name, Joe Miller. It's 37 years ago now, I guess. But he looked at me, Jason, and he said, "Be careful. If this business gets in your blood, you'll never get it out." And man, was he right. Because I've tried to walk away from it 2 or 3 times, and I just can't. Never been able to.
Yeah, I have never had somebody say that to me, but I do remember being 23 and producing, the morning show at WGY in Albany, New York. And it was, this local legend who at the time was probably in his early 60s, and I was 23. So I'm learning so much from this wise Yoda in my life who's teaching me and showing me. And he woke up, at 4 a.m, just like I did. And we would come in and do the show at 5:30 every day. And he looked at me one day and he said, "Isn't this great?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "It beats heavy lifting, doesn't it?" And I looked at him and I kind of laughed, and joked and thought, yeah, it does. But then the more I've thought about it, the older I've gotten, oh my goodness, look what we've gotten to do for all of these years. I'm on 25 years of doing this. You're in your 30, whatever you said, 36, 37 years. Mm-hmm. Look what we get to do in this media broadcasting space. And it does beat heavy lifting, doesn't it?
Well, didn't we talk about it when you were on my show that if the world's a department store, we work in the toy department.
Completely.
Yeah.
It's the best department to work in, isn't it?
You got that right, man.
I don't ever want to go back to something else. And it's funny because I've always thought, like, what else could I or would I do if God said, okay, what's the next step for you, or something different that you would have gone into and done? I don't know. I always thought sports was the word, and then whatever that was around that would be something I would go into. What would have been Dan Scott's calling if broadcasting didn't exist?
Well, I had 11 years as a sports writer and sports editor, so maybe I had that. My radio and broadcasting has kind of bracketed that. This is all I ever wanted to do. So I don't know that there was a fallback plan. My one semester in college, which is another story, preacher's kid turned loose in the world for the first time. I went for broadcast journalism. That was always the plan. So I guess in one sense, I wasn't very bright not to have a fallback plan, but this is always what I wanted to do. And I can see some similarities in the path between you and I, because God has taken what you have done in your broadcast career as a producer and now doing what you do kind of in front of the microphone and in front of the camera, but he's taken that and branched it out. You've written 2 books and you're a guest speaker, all these other places. So he's taken that avenue that you've loved and he's used it to branch you out in other places. And I'm beginning to see now, finally, that's what he's doing with me as well. I just spoke at a Christian leadership conference this past weekend. And so I'm getting more opportunities to do things like that and beginning to see that, okay, the doors that you can open because of your sports connection can now start leading to other great conversations about the gospel.
Yeah, so it becomes ministry.
God has a plan for all of us.
Yeah, it becomes ministry, which is a word you grew up a preacher's kid. I did not. So to hear those words, at 25 or whatever, I would have looked at you and said, what do you mean ministry? And now it's clear. I understand what he means, or what God means when using your work as worship, if you will, as a ministry. You mentioned the preacher's kid who kind of went astray a little bit in college. So it's funny because I was looking on your Twitter page, and it's a wonderful thing that you write on there. You just simply say, ask me about my testimony. So let's talk about your testimony. Let's talk about growing up the preacher's kid. And then it's a really interesting journey that you told me about when I was on your show. And I said, I want to have you on this show to kind of really go deeper and dive deeper into that testimony. Because to me, it's a pretty powerful one of God never giving up on any of us. And I would love for you to tell that story to our audience.
Well, my dad was and still is preaching and still pastoring after retiring from the pastorship. He came back 9.5 years later when the same church needed somebody to step in and help, and he's been back almost 2 years doing it again. So 52, 53 years he's been doing this. Best man that I know. Just an incredible, faithful, humble servant of God. It was also, and I was the oldest of 4, so strict disciplinarian. I grew up in that kind of home. I joke, it's the old preacher's kid joke, Jason, that I had a drug problem. Every time the church doors were open, I was drug inside it. From the time I was born until I was probably close to 18 years old. So I had the foundation. I came forward at a youth meeting when I was 14 years old and got baptized, but I looking back, I never made the commitment. I don't even recall praying the sinner's prayer. I just recall walking up and next thing I know, the next week I was being dumped in a creek. And so that time I've been baptized twice. The first time I just got wet. But I grew up in a great home. Part of my story is when I was 7, 8 years old, I was sexually abused by a group of older boys in the area where my grandmother used to live over a extended period of time before somebody found out and put a stop to it. Never really understood the effect that it had on me until many years later. It led to some massive insecurity that to a certain extent I still deal with, not nearly as much as I used to. It also, as you might imagine, warped my view of sex. So, all of this goes into what from the outside looked like a normal childhood growing up, because I played Little League baseball and I played Babe Ruth baseball and trumpet in the high school band from the time I was in the 8th grade, and high school basketball, and did have a wonderful childhood, but always had these other things that were, lingering in there. And when I got 18 years old and got out on my own, so to speak, I quit going to church because I didn't have to now, and would not attend church regularly again until probably 2003. So we're talking 1985 to 2003. And, I would go sporadically. But from as far as attending on a regular basis, I didn't. The one semester of college that I referred to, I went to major in broadcast journalism. I ended up majoring in alcohol. It lasted for a semester. And then I find myself back in my hometown, and through my late uncle, with some contacts he had, I was able to get a job at my hometown radio station, 1,000-watt AM station, spinning actual 45s from 6 to midnight, which means that you could probably hear it 2 blocks down the road, especially in the mountains of West Virginia. And so that was my career. And I met my wife while I was at the radio station. We got married 9 months after we met, had our first daughter 9 months after that, and began our lives with me in radio and newspaper. And at the time, she was in retail management. The dirty little secret of the whole thing was that I had this hole in my heart that I kept looking for other things to fill. And when I share my testimony, I talk about it. For the first 22 years of my marriage, I led a double life because I was trying to find something to fill that hole in my heart. And I tried alcohol, and I used to joke, but it's not funny, that it got to the point where I was on the verge of spelling drink with a U instead of an I. I mean, it really became a crutch.
Yeah.
I said that experience when I was younger warped my view of sex. I developed an incredible addiction to pornography, and it started, I must have been 10 or 11 years old the first time. And I don't know how many people have experienced this, guys have experienced this, but some older boy in our neighborhood had somehow gotten a Playboy magazine and had gone off into the woods and stashed it somewhere. And one day he said, "Hey guys, I want to show you something." That was my first exposure to that. And it's like they say about marijuana being a gateway drug. That was a gateway. Yeah. And once it started, there was no going back, and it just kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper the older I got. So I had that going on. I had all this insecurity, all of these things going on. And bottom line, I mean, I could tell this and it could take an hour and a half, but the bottom line is I had a Jesus-shaped hole in my heart. And everything that I was trying to fill that emptiness and call it pain or whatever you want to call it, nothing worked. And it got to the point I was cheating on my wife emotionally and physically, and I got found out. My double life got exposed in December of 2011, 2 days before Christmas. You'd think that'd be enough to wake somebody up, but it took another 6 months. And as I share in at least one version of my testimony, depending on the audience, aren't we glad and thankful that we have a God who pursues us?
Man, yeah.
Because what happened was he knew his plan for me. I was running as fast as I could run in the other direction. So he started taking things away from me. You know, the job that I had doing the daily talk show at the Clemson flagship station, I'd done it for 11 years. Doing the Clemson college baseball broadcast on the air and in the South. You know how big college baseball is. College baseball in South Carolina is more popular than college basketball. I mean, it's just huge. And I had developed just an incredible following from that. And with that came the ego and everything. And, you know, people tell you you're good at something long enough, you start to believe it.
Yeah.
So, and it didn't take me long to start to believe it. So I had all this going on. So God, I tell people, Jason, that finally he just cartoon style pulled the rug out from under me. And I mean, I'm flipping head over heels, you know, as we've all seen on Bugs Bunny. He took the job away from me. He took the baseball broadcasting away from me. He took everything that I thought was important away from me, up to the point that I was ready to lose my wife and kids. And that's, as I say, I got as low as I could possibly get. But when I did, and every time I tell this, I get emotional, and I can feel it coming on now. But when I was at the bottom, that's when I looked up, finally. And when I did, that's when I saw Jesus standing there with his arms open, saying, "Son, come home." And on June the 10th of 2012, I finally did. You want to talk about a car ride? We had gone to West Virginia because I wanted to talk to my dad, and I gave my life to Christ in my parents' living room on a Sunday morning, June the 10th. Went to church, made the public profession at the church, and after dinner, my wife and I started the 5-hour drive home. And on that 5-hour drive home, I confessed everything that I could remember that I had ever done in 22 years to her.
Wow.
So you want to talk about a car ride? But
she was still with you at the end of the car ride.
Yeah, she was.
That's good.
She was still with me, and she's still with me today. And we are, you know, working in different ministry opportunities together. The last, you know, this June 10th will be 10 years that I've given my life to Christ. And, you know, I had the big regret was that I waited 45 years to do it, obviously. And I prayed that God would give me another 45 years to make up for it. I don't know if that's in his plan or not, but here we are at almost a 10-year mark, and I can see where he's starting to open some doors to some ministry things that I'm doing now and working on and starting up. And whatever time he's given me, I just, you know, I'm going to dedicate it full time to him. And dangerous prayer to pray, you know, anything standing between you and me, God, remove it. And if it's my broadcasting career, you know, whatever it is, I'm going to him, you know, and if people are watching the Zoom thing, I got open hands. I've unclenched my hands and said, "Okay, God, everything I have is yours. Where do you want me to go?" And it scares me to death, Jason.
It's the most dangerous prayer we can pray, which is "Thy will be done." You know,
yes.
not my will, your will. Mm-hmm. I tell people that all the time. That's that open hands. And that means for all of us taking away potentially the thing that we may on this earth love the most, right? Whether it's our job or whether it's something else. "Thy will be done" is easily the most dangerous prayer. Your story is powerful, Dan. I think the thing that comes to my mind is thinking about not just people in my life or even myself, but those listening who might be questioning the fact that I hate to say it like this, but I'll say it bluntly. Are they saved? Right? Because it sounds like on the surface before 2012, and obviously what's going on inside your heart, what's going on even within your family is one thing. But outside of that, if I had called you in 2010 when you were doing Clemson games and said, "Hey, you want to come on Sports Spectrum and talk about Jesus and baseball and broadcasting," would you have said yes, and thinking that you were following Christ or at least a Christian at that time? Because I think a lot of people get caught up in that, thinking, okay, I believe I'm a Christian, but there was a transformation that took place and a sold outness, if you will, if that's even a word, to give your life to Jesus. But before that, was there Was there a picture on the outside that people probably still would have thought maybe I'm living this life the right way?
People thought it because I did a good job for a long time of hiding things. I had no misgivings or misconceptions. I knew I wasn't a Christian, but if people thought I was, I did not correct them. Because
probably because of your dad too, right?
Yeah, that. But I developed a public persona. Small town as it is, the 11 years I was on the air at the radio station in Clemson doing the daily talk show, we raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for different charity projects and Christmas projects, all during my show. And so I didn't intentionally mislead people. I mean, I would actually, if things came up, I would talk about it on the air from a moral, moral viewpoint. I considered myself to be a person who had good morals, even though in my private life I had these demons that were taking me in other places. But I never had any misgivings. I knew I wasn't a Christian. And in fact, as I shared with some folks the other day, in my mind, I used to have these conversations with Satan, and he would say, you do need to give your life to Christ, because the Bible says that the devil believes he knows who Jesus is.
Right.
But he would say to me, in order to do that, you're going to have to tell your wife what you've been doing. You're going to have to tell your kids what you've been doing, your family, your radio audience. Everybody's going to know what a fraud you've been for all these years. And are you ready for that to happen? And unfortunately, for a long time, the answer was no. And that's when God said, okay, it's time. And I mentioned he pulled the rug out from under me. So if somebody thought I was a Christian before, I never corrected them. I never said that I was. But starting on June 10th of 2012, I've said it as often as I could, because it's true.
Yeah, you were probably looked at as a good guy doing good things.
Yeah, exactly.
Before Christ. Now you're a bad guy who serves a good God, right?
And what's interesting about it is in the ensuing 10 years, I have never had the kind of large audience and massive impact that I had before becoming a Christian, before I lost the job at Clemson, when I got fired just a few months ahead of becoming giving my life to Christ. And sometimes I wonder, okay, God, now you've got me where you want me. Why is the audience so small, comparatively speaking? And I'm starting to figure out that it's not the size of the audience, but it's who the message is directed to. And we do a Furman University basketball game, and I don't know how many people are listening on our flagship station, but if it's online, there might be 200 or 300 people listening to the online version. If it's a Greenville Drive minor league baseball broadcast, there might be 350, 400 people signed on and watching the MILB broadcast. But I don't know how many of those people are there because they need to hear something that I might say during the course of one of those broadcasts. Or if I go speak at a conference, I've spoken in churches where there have been, maybe a couple of hundred people. I spoke at a conference this weekend where there were 25.
Yep.
But did somebody in that 25 need to hear the message? I'm beginning to figure out that God knows what he's doing. All I have to do is just get out of his way, go where he tells me to go, and move on. But I'd be lying if I didn't question. We had thousands and thousands of people listening when I was at Clemson. God, what kind of impact could I have for you if I was in front of that audience now?
Yeah.
And maybe, Jason, maybe the point is that up until this point, I wasn't equipped to handle it. Maybe that's coming. I don't know. I'm just beginning to understand that, all right, you know what you're doing. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing as long as I know it's your will, and you're going to take it to as many or as few as you want it to go to.
Well, a couple things come to mind, Dan Scott. First of all, being faithful with what you have, blooming where you're planted in the moment, right? That's number one, whether it's one or whether it's 5,000 or 25,000. But then I think about somebody told me this once, and I don't remember who told me, but Jesus's ministry, if you look at him, he was speaking to multitudes of crowds at certain points, but the majority of his ministry was done one-on-one, one-on-two, up to 1-on-12, obviously with his disciples. And it made me think, it doesn't, God will do what he wants with it, right? If you're working and you have one person that listens to your broadcast, or one person that reads my book, or one person that says, hey, Dan, I saw on your LinkedIn that it says your number one goal is to glorify Jesus Christ and tell as many people as possible what he's done in your life. Tell me what he's done in your life. That's worth it. If it's one more person that you can share your story with, and I know that I'll just say hundreds are going to listen to this one, hopefully thousands. I'm not going to guarantee nothing, but I know our audience and how many people listen. And if hundreds of people listen to your story and a couple are moved by it and want to come to faith in Christ, or want to help develop a greater relationship with their daughter because of the conversations that we've had earlier, or think that they're 45 and it's probably too late for them, and yet they hear your story and say, no way, man. If you're alive and God's not finished with you yet, then it's worth it, right?
What God does, Jason, in his sovereign way, is every once in a while, because I know I'm not the only person. I'm sure you've probably asked this question. God, am I making a difference? I'm trying. Am I really making a difference? Because I'll put stuff out on social media. I'll share talks that I've done. And, sometimes if you listen closely, you feel like you can almost hear the crickets. Am I making a difference? Every once in a while, out of nowhere, somebody will walk up to me and say, hey, I listened to your podcast, and I want to tell you that what you said, or the guest that you had and what you were talking about, meant so much to me because, or every broadcast I do, whether it's at Furman or whether it's with the Greenville Drive, the last thing I say as we're signing off is, I'm Dan Scott, saying, God bless you all. So long, everybody. And I had a lady come up to me from Furman, which is a very, very highly liberal arts university.
Right.
I had a lady come up to me just about a month or so ago. We were in some kind of setting, and she just kind of sidled up to me and not quite whisper, but almost. She said, I just want you to know how much it means to me to hear you say, God bless you at the end of your broadcast. Please don't stop. And that's God sending somebody to me saying, yeah, you are making a difference.
Yeah.
Just trust me, be faithful, keep doing what you're doing. And when I'm ready for it to take off, if I'm ready, it will. And if your audience stays what it is now, then you're ministering to the people I want you to minister to.
Yeah, that's good. It's a good reminder too. I think we all can get caught up, especially in the sports world, on looking at numbers and approval and achievement and all of these things. And
followers on social media.
Oh my gosh. It's so easy to get caught up in that, Dan. And even just talking to you is a good reminder to just remember that we are playing for an audience of one. I heard somebody say this the other day. Malik Willis, the Liberty quarterback who's going to be selected in the NFL draft, said, I play for an audience of one. And it can become a cliche, but if you're really living your life for Jesus, that's what it's about. It becomes an audience of one.
And we need to be reminded of that, because I'm human. I'm imperfect, and I want to broadcast in front of as many people as I can.
Of course.
I want a massive audience listening to what I do, because especially now, because I think I've got a message. Well, not I know I've got a message that people need to hear.
Yes.
But back to what you said a minute ago, the most effective messages Jesus had were one-on-one. The encounter with Nicodemus, the woman at the well,
yep.
The
rich young ruler,
the rich young ruler, the demon-possessed man who was cutting himself, the woman taken in adultery. I mean, there were a lot of people at the beginning, but at the end, it was just him and her. One-on-one, those were powerful messages. And I don't know how you are with this. I'm a lot more comfortable speaking to crowds. I'm a lot more comfortable standing on a stage and talking to groups than I am in a one-on-one setting. And that's something I've been praying about lately, because his greatest messages were in that setting.
Yeah, it's I'm definitely more comfortable speaking to larger crowds too, because you can kind of hide, if you will, the fact that you're not talking to one person, you're talking to, a large group of people. But when you get one-on-one, that's when it becomes real. You can't hide that in the one-on-one setting. You got to be who you truly are. People will read that and see through that very quickly.
Yep.
If you aren't. So as we wind down here, I love your story. It's such a powerful one. We just had Easter, and it just makes me think, this is the perfect question to ask Dan Scott, because it's been 10 years. What a great anniversary to celebrate, by the way. I just celebrated 20 years of my walk last year, but what a great, perfect number to look at 10 years ago to where you are now, as a follower of Jesus. What is the resurrection? What is the cross? When you think about that, what does that mean to you?
I think it was Billy Graham who said, if we don't have the resurrection, we don't have any hope.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to boil it down to brass tacks, as simple as possible, if Christ did not rise from the dead, then none of this matters. The Bible's not true, and what we're following is a lie. I believe that he did rise from the dead, and because of the resurrection, we have a hope that we did not have before. We have the ability to obtain eternal life through a relationship with Jesus, who is now sitting on the right hand of the Father, advocating for us. It's everything. In what we believe, it is simply everything. Everything that Christianity hinges on the fact that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And thankfully, we have the documentation that proves that. But beyond the documentation, for those of us who have given our lives to Christ, we know it because we have him living in us through the Holy Spirit. And that's difficult for people to understand sometimes, people who aren't Christians. But yeah, man, it's everything. I just did a talk on a post-Easter story. That's kind of the Easter story, but it's Jesus on the road to Emmaus with the two men, and framing it around what he teaches us about communication. That he joined a conversation, he listened to the conversation, and only then did he change the conversation by revealing who he is. They couldn't see it until he was ready for him to see it. They were walking with the resurrected Christ,
mm-hmm.
and didn't know until their spiritual eyes were finally opened when they were at the house of Cleopas, and he blessed the bread and broke it and gave it to him. And then they realized who he was. I think a lot of us are like those two men on the road to Emmaus. We at least I was before I was saved. We knew what we were told about Jesus, but were we really buying it? Were we really sure? Until the day that I was sure. And now there's no doubt. And it's because of the resurrection.
Dan Scott, buddy, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. Thanks for coming on. I love what you put on your Twitter page. Ask me about my testimony. And I hope people hearing this will either go to your Twitter page and direct other people to ask you about your testimony as well, or continue to have you presented with opportunities to share it, because it's an important story that people need to hear. And I think it's Jesus doing his best work when he finds someone in their 40s and reveals himself to them. I'm not saying it's not as cool when you're 27 like me, or when my daughter was 10, or kids are 12 or 15 or 18 or 20. Every story is an important one, but there's something unique, because the statistics show by the time you get to your 30s and 40s, it's very unlikely that you're changing who you have already become by that time. So your story is an important one, buddy.
Yeah. My salvation story defies every statistic in the Christian world. It really does.
Yeah.
And if I can take 30 seconds quickly before we wrap up, I don't want to take advantage of you, but
No, please.
I've talked about ministries and where God is leading me. I have started a new ministry, and by the time this episode drops, the website should be active and we should be close to getting everything rolling. But I'm going to encourage people to go to danscottshow.org. And I prayed about this, dragged my feet for about 18 months, Jason. But God is leading me into a radio ministry where I'm going to be buying time on stations across the country to do a weekly 1-hour show that's going to incorporate sports and faith. And then inside, and the nonprofit is called Grand Slam Ministries. Wonder where that came from, right? And there will be a website for that too that'll actually point back to danscottshow.org. It'll be grandslamministries.org.
Got it.
But I'm going to also put a lot of time and effort into helping mentor men, because when I got saved at our church here in Seneca, South Carolina, there were a number of men who poured into me, and I want to take what they did and pay it forward. So we're going to do that. And then something that's going on all across the country, unfortunately, there are children who leave school on Friday and they don't eat again until they come back to school on Monday. And one of the things that I'm going to try to do with this is get involved with some organizations that do backpack programs, or find some way to make sure that in our area here, children don't do that. I mean, it's frightening to think that's the case, but we got involved in that about 10, 12 years ago and saw it firsthand. And it's just, in the most affluent society in America, we have children in my backyard, in your backyard, everybody who's listening right there where you are, who will go home from school on Friday and probably won't eat again until they come back on Monday. It's just heartbreaking. Yeah. So that's where God is leading me. And I said earlier, I was praying, open arms, God, open hands. If wherever you're going to take me, this is part of it.
I love it. danscottshow.org is the website, and you can find the Grand Slam Ministries link there, and grandslamministries.org. I'm excited for you, man. Lots of cool stuff. And I'm hoping and thinking in a couple of years, if we have you back on, there's probably a lot of new stories that both of us will be able to tell. And that's why we serve a great God who just opens up doors that we couldn't imagine when we stay faithful and obedient to him. So, Dan, thanks, buddy. Thanks for being on the show.
I've already told you that with this radio show, I'm going to be coming after your Rolodex. So
we'll have to have a separate discussion on that, my brother.
I know. Jason, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely, Dan. Thanks for being here, buddy. And many thanks to Dan Scott. What a fantastic story, an amazing testimony when you think about 45 years old, 10 years ago, giving his life to Jesus, and now starting a ministry and really trying to live his faith out in the world of broadcasting. And he's got a gift. That guy has an incredible voice, an incredible talent when you're able to broadcast for 30 plus years and doing sports and play-by-play work at Furman University. Man, Dan Scott has one heck of a story. Can't wait to see, hopefully, what the next 10 years brings to Dan Scott as he tries to glorify Jesus Christ and tell as many people as possible what God has done in his life. So, again, many thanks to Dan for being here today on Sports Spectrum. We sure do appreciate him, and we sure do appreciate you. We thank you for tuning in. It means everything when you listen, when you tune in, when you engage in our content. It really does. Sports Spectrum exists to glorify God, to bring Jesus into the sports conversation and keep Jesus in the sports conversation. And we hope you enjoyed today's interview and have enjoyed the content that we've been able to produce for you over these many years. Do us a favor, click that subscribe and that follow button so that you never miss an episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast. There's tons of content and archival content that go back now 5 years at Sports Spectrum's podcast. You can also check us out at sportspectrum.com, our website, updated every single day with devotionals and podcasts and articles and stories, all available at sportspectrum.com. Thanks again for tuning in. We love you guys. Have a great rest of your day. Please do stay safe and tune in next time right here on Sports Spectrum.